Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Art Forum. If you don't know me, my name's David Sequeira. I'm the director of the Margaret Lawrence Gallery, and I also do all of the programming and hosting for Art Forum at the Victorian College of the Arts. And before we begin, I want to take a moment and really take a moment for everybody here, I guess, for us to ground ourselves in the country on which we're located. And for us at the University of Melbourne, we are located on Bunurong Wurundjeri land, and it's quite beautiful to consider that for generations before the Victorian College of the Arts or the University of Melbourne was thought about, that the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people of the Greater Kulin Nation practiced song and dance and told stories, created sculpture, and that these rituals continue today. And it really is with great joy that I pay my respect on behalf of all of us to their elders past, present, and emerging. Our guest speaker, Nina Miall, is a Sydney-based independent curator and writer who works across institutional, commercial, and public art contexts. Primary among her curatorial concerns are socially engaged, interdisciplinary, and site-specific practices, which she has explored in exhibitions that she's curated in Europe, the United States, Asia, and Australia. From 2012 to 2017, Nina was the visual arts curator at Carriageworks, Sydney, curating projects with major international artists and large-scale surveys of Australian art, including the National. Prior to Carriageworks, Nina was based in London, where she was the director of leading contemporary art gallery Haunch of Venison and head of public programs at the Royal Academy of Arts. In 2010, Nina participated in the ICA London's mentorship program for young cultural leaders. And between 2017 and 2018, she took part in the Australia Council's Arts Leaders program. Nina is the curator of the current Tarawara Biennial, Slow Moving Waters, and is shortly to take up the position of curator, international art at the Queensland Art Gallery, Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane. Wherever you are, please join me in making Nina very, very welcome.
Well, thank you very much, David, for that kind introduction. And it's my great pleasure to speak today. Thank you all for joining. I'd like to begin by echoing your acknowledgement of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people of the Greater Kulin Nation. And I'd like to especially acknowledge a debt of gratitude to Auntie Joy Murphy-Wandin for her really significant and generous contribution to the Tarawara Biennial. I'd also like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land on which I live and work here in Sydney. And finally, I'd like to honour the generations of First Nations people everywhere who have been caretakers and custodians of this land and its waterways for generations. I thought I would begin by speaking about how I came to curate the Tarawara Biennial. I will share my PowerPoint at this point. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Tarawara Biennial. For those of you who aren't, it's a biannual survey of new forms and ideas in Australian contemporary art practice, which takes place at the Tarawara Museum of Art in the Yarra Valley. Now, I was invited by the director there, Victoria Lynn, to submit a few proposals. And I sent her 3 ideas for a biennial, 2 of which could have happened anywhere. But the third of which was about slowness, was intimately tied to the history and unique context of Tarawara. So it was rather serendipitous. I'd been thinking about ideas around slowness and deceleration for some time. And it was rather serendipitous to discover that the word Tarawara is a Woiwurrung word, which is kind of widely accepted to translate as slow moving waters. And it refers to a particularly meandering passage of the Birrarung, the Yarra River, which hugs the southern boundary line of the Tarawara estate. So I devised an exhibition that responded to two related cues, this idea of slowness and the gentle measured flow of the Birrarung. And I wanted to create an exhibition that was very much in tune and aligned with these slow moving waters and the circuitous kind of discursive logic of the river. The exhibition that I have curated, which is on there at the moment, features 25 artists from across the country working in all different media. It is notable for its representation of First Nations artists and ideas. I think roughly a third of the 25 artists are First Nations. And it's also notable for the really site-responsive and site-specific nature of many of the artworks that have been created, especially for the exhibition. I wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of backdrop and theoretical framework to this discussion of slowness. You know, we live in an age of acceleration, or a kind of cult of speed, it's also being referred to as. And Jonathan Crary calls it the expanding non-stop life world of 21st century capitalism. And for some years now, it has really felt that at the level of the individual and of the collective and of the planet, we have been experiencing these sort of exponentially rapid shifts in time, which have been brought about by the velocity of all the many innovations in technology, by the sort of the hum of instantaneous communications that we're all very familiar with, and by the volatility of globalization and these global cycles of production and circulation and consumption in which we move. And it's a frenetic time, and it's a time that has dramatically reshaped human experience in a very short period. And many people feel they've become quite habitualized to its urgent tempos. But many people also feel like there is a human cost to this time, one that is sort of an informational overload and a besieged attention span, and that technologies which should have been liberating are now increasingly enslaving. And so there are these dramatic social and environmental consequences to this cult of speed. And, you know, in one sense, I feel like we're living in a kind of age of human and environmental expenditure. Crary also talks about the idea of a time that no longer passes, such is the kind of expectation of continuous functioning. And it's in marked contrast to the great deliberate cycles of nature. There's very much a sense in that the distinctions between day and night and work and leisure are being increasingly eroded. And a result of that is that human life is kind of losing this textured and inflected and nuanced character. So this was sort of all very much at the forefront of my mind in thinking around this show. It's slow ideas are not new. They are, they've been developing momentum for many years and are gaining currency, you know, across all manner of different activities, slow TV, slow food, slow cities. So there's a global movement in and a growing interest in more reflective and sustainable ways of living. I'm now going to move through a couple of installation shots just briefly to give you a sense of the galleries, the broader rooms of the exhibition before looking at a couple of works in more depth. So here is the first gallery of the exhibition. At the far end on the wall, you can see a snaking wooden Daniel Crook sculpture. Beside that to the right, the Enclasticine photo media works by Christian Capuro. On the ground is a beautiful another serpentine evocation of the river that is a work by Jonathan Jones together with Auntie Joy Murphy-Wandon, and in the foreground is a work by Jeremy Backer. So the starting point for this exhibition was the idea that between hyperacceleration and the impossibility of stopping altogether is this space of possibility and of resistance, slowing down. The exhibition seeks to carve out a space within those processes of speed and efficiency that govern contemporary life, to reflect on alternative conceptions of time and how they might offer different ways of being in the world. In terms of how I understand slowness, I was very keen, firstly, to harness that idea of heightened awareness and alertness to the present. But it was also really important to me that slowness had a kind of a political charge to it. So the idea of slowness as a mode of resistance and of disruption and restraint, a kind of concerted deceleration of that relentless productivity that's demanded of us. So I was really keen to kind of that came across in many of the artworks. So I shared my curatorial framework with artists as I had usually remote studio visits, because much of the research took place during COVID, with a number of artists from around the country. And it was clear to me that it resonated, these ideas of slowness resonated with many of the artists. And there were many practices that were looking to other conceptions of time, whether they were seasonal cycles and natural rhythms, such as this work here on the left, the Barrett Jala, beautiful bark paintings by Nongana Marawili, an artist from Yirrkala in northeast Arnhem Land. And on the right, we have a work by Mandy Quadrio, Whose Time Are We On? Mandy is a Palawa artist currently living in Brisbane. So there were artists looking to sort of seasonal cycles and natural rhythms, to deep geological time, cosmological time, and ancient knowledge systems. I was very keen to create a really grounded and site-responsive exhibition that had a very strong connection to place. And to that end, I invited many artists to come and do residencies, some of which were made impossible by COVID, others of which took place prior to COVID. And I really wanted an exhibition that was kind of attentive to the subtleties of its local context. You know, Tarawara is a natural home for an exhibition about slowness in that regard, being in a regional location. This is, another installation shot with a two-channel video work, or single-channel video work across two screens by Grant Stevens on the far wall. And on the right, you have the 4 light boxes are an artwork especially created for the exhibition about the dynamics of the Birrarung, the Yarra River, by Victorian artist James Gertz. So ironically and rather aptly, slowness was further built into the methodology of the exhibition by the arrival of COVID. And I saw COVID referred to the other day as a vast ceremony of deceleration, which I really liked. So the exhibition was meant to take place in 2020, was postponed by 8 months. And I was quite chuffed that slowness became embedded in the methodology by chance as much as by design. You know, there was certainly a sense during COVID that our experience of time was dramatically altered, and that a lot of those daily rituals and routines were severely disrupted. And so I think the idea of slowness does assume a sort of special resonance in this period. And for many people, that involves a realization that in our insistence on this kind of perpetual motion, that we've neglected traction. And for some people, that involved a kind of return to simple and sustaining pleasures, or a kind of reset of priorities. For the exhibition, I felt very strongly that the process of deceleration began for many people from the moment they committed to make the journey to Tarawara. Many people are traveling from metropolitan regions, and so there is a slowing down that takes place as you travel out to Tarawara. In terms of how I've approached the presentation of works in the space, there are works such as this one by Jeremy Backer, which is the first work you encounter in the exhibition. And it is placed smack bang at the entrance to the first gallery. and is designed almost as a kind of physical impediment to slow down a hastening through the exhibition and to encourage a pause. This work is entitled On Time, and it's a provocation, really. You can see a granite rock has punctured the glass face of an analog clock. What you can't see in this still image is that it sort of frustrated the forward momentum of the arms, but there is the second hand continues to kind of pulse against the inert mass of the rock, emitting this very feeble sound as it gently taps the side of the rock. And this work, I feel, really announces a pause to what Jeremy calls clock time and its urgencies, and instead kind of exhorts us to attend to the quieter rhythms of what he calls non-ticking time. So it was a very kind of meaningful work for the start of the exhibition. Other works, as you've seen in the Daniel Crooks and back here, and the Jonathan Jones work, have quite serpentine forms that snake through this space, almost suggesting the course of the river. The exhibition was designed to unfold spatially, temporally, materially, and conceptually. So there are many works that develop or change or shift over the course of the exhibition, which runs for 4 months, and that reward closer extended viewing or repeat visitation to the exhibition. That durational dimension is also present in other works which harness duration through time and labor-intensive processes and techniques. And there's a strong representation of First Nations artists, as I said, who understand far more than sort of Western culture the importance of unhurried time for complex encounters between the self and the environment. And on that note, this is a work by a Yarrawuru artist originally from the Kimberley region, but based in Brisbane, called Robert Andrew. Melbourne audiences are very familiar with his work. There was an incredible work by him at ICA just recently. And Robert is known for these kinetic installations which bring organic matter and contemporary technologies into a rich and textured dialogue. Many of them kind of typically conduct a slow material transformation, which unearth hidden layers of Indigenous narratives, history and language. This work here is called Continuing Depths of Connection. And you can see an electromechanical apparatus extrudes an ochre-coloured thread, which loops and pulls over the crushed granite below. And it slowly over time spells out in this beautiful cursive script the word Inala, which is an Aboriginal word that has various associations, including a resting place or a kind of gathering together of community. I'm afraid I don't have a video, but it's incredibly slow moving. It's almost imperceptible in terms of the slowness of its movement. Many of Robert's works involve acts of subtraction or erasure, but this particular one develops from an act of accrual. You get this kind of repeated rewriting and reiteration of the word Inala, where it acts as a palimpsest, where each transcription of the word bears the trace of its earlier form. And it sort of, in that respect, it gradually enacts this gathering together of community and invites us to consider the gradual and complex processes by which people are brought together and share knowledge and culture. This work here is a work by Michaela Gleeve called The World Arrives at Night, Star Printer. Michaela is a New South Wales-based artist based here in Sydney. She has a quite conceptual, research-driven practice where she draws on natural phenomena and processes of perception to ask what are often quite existential questions about our relationship to the known and unknown worlds. This is a slightly older work from 2014, which is typical of her long-standing engagement with astronomy and with the space of the sky as a site of inquiry. And here you have a dot matrix printer that has specially developed source code built into it, which charts the gradual rotation of the Earth specific to the location of the work at Tarawara. So it has the GPS coordinates of Tarawara. And then it registers the appearance over the horizon of each star, of stars basically, and it prints out key information relating to certain stars at a rate of 1 star per minute, theoretically for eternity. So you can see here the printout registers such details as the star's common name, its constellation, its spectral type, its distance from the sun in light years, among other bits of information. And so over time, as you can see on the right, you get this kind of incessant flow of data which accumulates and concertinas again and again and again, and becomes this sea of paper on the floor in which are contained these majestic trajectories of celestial movement. And I'm anticipating by the end of the exhibition that that pile will be really quite something to behold. This is an artist who is also interested in the abstraction and translation of data, although for this particular work, she is looking down instead of up, as Michaela does. Louisa Buffederci, a Melbourne-based artist. And Louisa, for the exhibition, devised this suite of 8 new needlepoint works. And the work takes shape around the silt sedimentation, which remained on the soles of the artist's feet and between her toes following a swim in the Birrarung, the Yarra River. She then subjected that kind of raw material to a staged process of abstraction. So firstly, she placed it under a child's microscope, and then she transcribed what she saw onto a needlepoint chart. And finally, there's a further act of abstraction in the activity of the needlepoint itself. So decontextualized here and rendered in this array of colored yarns, these sediments assume all manner of different associations, from mineralogical to cosmological, you know, and up close. I think I've got a detail here. They're incredibly beautiful and quite mercurial. And you get almost this kind of shifting topography in which various recognizable forms might be perceived. And there's very much a sense in which she's kind of synthesized these micro and macro perspectives. And, you know, this sediment has been kind of extended through time to speak to the abiding materiality of the world, of the land. Louisa speaks about how she was looking, having long admired the connection to country, that deep and rich connection to country that is so fundamental to so many First Nations epistemologies. Louisa had been looking for ways in which she could connect to the land in ways that were more generative than extractive. So she is interested in what she calls the way place and history can stick to us. That is the kind of slow, cumulative and lasting impressions left on us by our experience in the world. This particular work is work by an artist based in Perth, Jacobus Capone. Jacobus's practice encompasses intimate gestures and acts of endurance which enfold in often remote and extreme landscapes. He refers to them as uncertain pilgrimages. And this is a work called Sincerity and Symbiosis, 3-channel video. And it marks the second act in an ongoing project, which is called Forewarning. And that takes shape around kind of expressions of ecological grief, which are manifest as a series of reconciliations and farewells within environments that have often been imperiled by human behavior. So this particular one, Sincerity and Symbiosis,
documents a 6-week-long durational performance that the artist undertook in a plantation forest in Shiga Prefecture in Japan in 2019. And every single day of this 6-week-long period, he performed a solitary, highly ritualized choreography of walks barefoot in the middle of winter, in which he sought to honor every tree in the forest. And as you watch the video, you realize increasingly that it's actually it's about deforestation, essentially. He's walking around to each and every tree, and he gradually holds his kind of upturned palm towards it, seeking to honor every tree in the forest. But he never makes physical contact with the trunk. And it implies the very sort of fraught symbiosis between humans and their environment. It's a communion with nature that never actually arrives or is realized. And instead, the landscape leaves scratches and bruises on his body, unseen marks that are exacerbated with each daily ritual. At the same time as this sort of devastation and loss, there is something in the humble ministrations of care and this performance of a kind of aesthetics of care, which is redemptive and which suggests a sort of heightened alertness to the fragility of the natural world. Moving on, this is a work by a New South Wales artist, Jasmine Smith, who has a ceramic practice in which she adopts a almost kind of forensic approach to site and place. So for this particular work, Tarawara was developed specifically for Tarawara and takes its shape and colour and form and texture directly from the Tarawara estate. So it emerged from a rigorous research process and residency in which Jasmine worked very closely with the viniculturalists at Tarawara estate, learning all about the kind of local hydrology and geology and soil composition. And she then worked with them on taking grapevine cuttings, these prunings, and casting them in clay on site. And then she fired them in a site-derived glaze. So the glaze was actually made from the ash of their burnt remains. And she calls this particular glaze Tarawara Pinot Noir vine ash glaze. And basically in the kind of, and I don't know if I've got a detail. No, I don't, I'm afraid. But in the sort of mushroomy brown patina and satiny texture of this glaze, this is decided by the unique kind of balance of macro and micronutrients in the soil. And so in that regards, it finds parallel in the French concept of terroir, that idea that the character and color and texture and palette of different wines is determined by environmental factors, such as the soil composition and the bedrock and the climate, and also by human activities, like the kind of agricultural management. So there's a sense, I mean, they resemble bones that have been excavated from the land. And there's definitely a sense in which it really appreciates the ecology of Tarawara as a system of interconnectedness. What you can't see from this particular image is that when you view the work from front on, the gradient of the line of grapevine cuttings aligns with the gradient of the actual vines in the external landscape outside. You can see straight through the doorway is in the next gallery is a big window that looks out over the vines. And there is a sweet spot in the gallery looking at Jasmine's work where the gradients of her work and the vines in the external landscape align. So she's really seeking to reveal the sort of hidden layers of history and geology and culture of the place. Moving on, this is work by Megan Cope. Megan was formerly based in Melbourne, but is once COVID hit, she legged it very quickly up to the Northern Rivers region in New South Wales. And she's a Quandamooka artist originally from North Stradbroke Island. This is a new work developed for the exhibition, Currents 3, Freshwater Studies, which considers the health of the waterways and issues of rising sea levels and ocean acidification. And basically, Megan has developed, I think around 60 odd ice sculptures, 3 of which are hung in the space at any one time. And she has coloured them, and you get something of the sense of them here. But actually, they're all, there's a wide range of colours across all the 60 ice sculptures. And she uses natural plant extracts, which are natural, such as red cabbage and blueberries, and that have these really incredible, vibrant colours. And they're natural pH indicators. And these ice sculptures slowly melt over the handmade paper you can see here, which is made from algal blooms. And again, algal blooms are known for kind of disrupting the pH balance of lakes and reservoirs. And as these ice cores melt, they stain the paper really lurid colours, which change with the rise and fall in pH levels. And there's this kind of live painting process that happens, which lends the work this really dynamic materiality and sort of quite unstable form. And so that obviously each set of ice sculptures is installed once every week on a Friday and melts slowly over the next couple of days. If you haven't yet seen the exhibition and you are planning to go, I'd strongly urge trying to go on a Friday so you can catch that process, because it's really spectacular. It's really something. Next, we have a work by a Tasmanian artist based in Hobart, Lucy Bleach. Lucy has long been interested in our relationship to volatile and unstable environments and to ideas of geologic force and the often invisible transformations that take place under the surface of the earth. And for this exhibition, she's devised an installation with 3 components. It's called Attenuated Ground, the Slow Seismogenic Zone. And Lucy worked very closely with seismologists, scientists, and other specialists. This installation responds to the specific geological phenomena of slow earthquakes, which are almost imperceptible to us. It's the slow earthquake activity which leads to the large megathrust earthquakes that we feel above the earth. She refers to it as a poetry of collapse. And for this work, she actually went and apprenticed herself to a professor of slow earthquakes in Japan, and also to a kintsugi master in Japan, to learn the art of kintsugi, whereby broken ceramics, broken pieces of ceramic are almost kind of stitched or sutured back together and illuminated with gold leaf in a way that reveals the cracks, and based on a philosophy that finds beauty in the flawed object, refuses to consider it flawed. So here we have a work, it's a double base embalmed with toffee, and Lucy basically cooked up something like 330 kilograms. I think it used 330 kilograms of sugar to create this slab of toffee that embalms the double base. And she then removed the sides, and slowly over the last 5 weeks of the exhibition, it has been slumping onto the plaster bed below. This is it quite recently, when you can see a lot of it has slumped off and is revealing the form of the double base. What you can't probably see in this image, or maybe at the very top, the strings of the double base are excited by things called tactile transducers, which basically transfer the infrasonic pulse of slow earthquake events that have been, the data of which has been collected in the Japan Trench. And it means that the instrument effectively plays the release of seismic activity. and a seismometer buried in the toffee then picks up these vibrations and shifting their tone slightly, essentially making visible and audible subterranean processes, which we rarely get to kind of witness directly. And these are the two other components in the same installation. On the right, you have the polished concrete slab. So this slab was fractured. It was put on a device called a biaxial simulator that simulates the seismic activity of these slow earthquake events. And it was fractured through this process of seismic simulation. And then the artist has basically sutured back together those using these methods of kintsugi, using powdered core sample, again taken from the seismogenic zone in the subduction zone in the Japan Trench, illuminated with gold. And then on the left here, you have a Ficus Coronata, which is an endemic species of fig tree found near the Tarawara estate. And it grows in a rhizobox, which reveals the, and again, you can't quite see the detail of this, but the incredible vascular system of roots and these remarkable channels of communication between the kind of superterranean and subterranean spheres. So unfortunately, you can't see all these three works together on the slides, but they're a really kind of, it's a really rich installation which explores Lucy's interest in sustained vibration and in slow states of transition and delicate acts of repair. And finally, we have this experiential site responsive work by a Brisbane-based artist, Fransman. And it grew out of a residency and involved Caitlin collaborating with a number of local collaborators, including a chef and an edible weeds specialist. And Caitlin is known for these participatory works that often develop around slow practices and conversations and collective forms of care. This particular work is actually an audio work, which obviously I can't share with you here, but it proceeds from this kind of sculptural element. So this is the final work in the exhibition. And you have this sculptural element of the hand-blown glassware, which contains edible and medicinal plant matter that's been foraged from the local area and preserved and fermented. It includes grapes and blackberries and coriander, the native mint, muly from the Peruvian pepper tree, flatweed flowers, swamp gum leaves, and living kombucha cultures. And this installation acts as a kind of sensory prompt for an intimate audio experience, which is accessed by a QR code that you can find on the wall label for the work. And when you download the audio walk, you hear the artist's voice, which guides you outside the museum and walks you around the estate. And Caitlin sort of reflects on the microscopic cultures of Tarawara, these kind of cellular ecologies, on ideas of kind of borders and the intricate microbial relations that exist between humans and their environment. And these reflections are kind of interwoven with atmospheric soundscapes. And it's really, I was keen that the exhibition would spill out into the landscape. And this work really does that. It encourages the kind of slow practice of dwelling and aligning with place through ideas of walking and observing and listening and growing and foraging and discovering. And in that way, it sort of weaves, connections between the microbiomes of the soil and the plants and humans to explore the interconnectedness of all living things. So on that note, I might wrap up this presentation, but I'm very, very happy to answer any questions about how I've approached the curation of this biennial, or any other particular questions about the selection of artists or the process. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nina. That was just so incredibly rich and generous. And I must confess, I haven't seen the show yet, but it is definitely on my list. And I want to start off some of the questions. The first one is really about your methodology. And you alluded to something when you talked about Jeremy Backer's work and its placement as I think you described it as the first work that you encountered. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about how, if slowness impacted, like how it impacted the layout of the exhibition or the design.
Yeah, it's a good question, and one I kind of reflected on at length. And I was very keen that slowness shouldn't translate into dullness. In terms of the experience of the exhibition, I thought it was, it was important that there was dynamism there, and so I approached it in a number of different ways. Firstly, there were these kind of physical impediments that really were placed very much, in the kind of natural path of the visitor wandering through the exhibition. And so were designed to really stop people from just walking straight through a gallery and kind of glancing each way at the walls. So there were the physical impediments. There was a sense, the sort of motif of the river was obviously really, really critical to the work, and the idea of its discursive logic and its kind of a more circuitous route. And so there is a sense in which you kind of wend your way through the exhibition. And I thought at one point I was talking to Jonathan Jones about a work that would be kind of distributed throughout the exhibition and would sort of thread through the entire space, very much like a river. And in the end, that sort of didn't eventuate. But at the same time, the collaboration with Auntie Joy Murphy-Wandin, which I didn't speak about at length, but is a beautiful work which looks to, brings together two of the original creation stories of the Birrarung. And there's an audio, a kind of soundscape in which Auntie Joy Murphy-Wandin recounts one of these tales in which an old man kind of pushes a boy, causing him to cry, and his tears become the stream of the river. But it's recorded, so it's almost barely audible. There's sort of whispers of it. And so it's really a provocation to kind of attend to the wisdom of the elders and those histories and that sort of deep geological time. Yeah, so there's a number of works, as I said, with the Daniel Crooks and Jonathan Jones and Auntie Joy's work, which almost snake their way through the gallery or have that kind of serpentine winding form. And then there are a lot of the works that are durational, as I said. So it really, even in the 5 weeks that we've had so far of the exhibition, it runs until the 11th of July. So it's got a very generous 4-month-long run. There will be substantial change. So I am really hoping that encourages kind of repeat visitation. And I'm already, enjoying seeing, as people post to social media, I am seeing how these works have shifted and changed in a matter of weeks. The toffee of Lucy Bleach's work was extraordinary because we had this moment of unveiling, and we had a photographer there from the Australian who was ready to capture this moment when the toffee slumped for the first time, and Lucy unboxed it, and it was remarkably solid. And we had this kind of horrifying moment of going, oh, it's not going to slump as we thought it would, and then overnight it just completely, sort of dropped over the edges. And it's slowing down now, but for a while there was sort of dramatic movement there and dramatic change. And so I think that gives a sense of duration. And there's other works in the show, again, by Raquel Ormella and Oliver Wagner, who I didn't address in this presentation, but who their works involve very laborious processes, very time intensive. And so I think I think those are the ways in which I've really tried to embed slowness in the experience of the exhibition. Yeah. David, sorry, I can't hear you. I think you might be on mute.
I am on mute. There we are, thanks. You'd think I'd know after a year, but look, this might be a slightly naughty question, but I'm going to put it out there. Do you think that there's a materiality or an aesthetic of slowness?
It's a very good question, and I was really struck, having spent the best part of 2 years working on this exhibition, largely over email and Zoom, and it was very sort of theoretical. And I was really struck when I got into the gallery and we uncrated the works, and we were fortunate enough to have a number of artists be able to fly down and install their works. And I was really struck by by the materiality of the exhibition. It was a much more rich and textured and material show than I think I'd necessarily realized. And a lot of that involved unpredictable or unstable materials. But I think there was a sense in which Jonathan Crary talks a lot about this kind of flattening of human experience that has taken place, and how we're losing those rich textures and inflections and kind of nuances. And so I think there was definitely a sense that a lot of the works in the show do have a rich texture to them. Yeah, so I wouldn't say there's a uniform aesthetic of slowness, but I think materials that encourage a heightened attention, and maybe that's a tactility or a kind of heightened, a sharpening of your senses, or that seek to sort of, almost amplify the granular nature of perception. Yeah, it's a good question, but I think there probably is, but I wouldn't say it is a uniform aesthetic. Yeah.
Well, Nina, thank you so much for your generosity today. And I think, the show just sounds so beautiful, but also so important, because the thing that I'm really moved by is the idea that well, what's captured my imagination is what gets revealed through slowness. That so much is hidden in the cursory, and that slowness actually opens up something, exposes something, brings to the foreground, and it's a very, very magical property of time that you've brought into the curatorial realm. And I thank you so much for sharing all of that with us today. I also congratulate you on the appointment at Queensland, and we look forward to the future. I also, before I finish up, I also want to acknowledge VCA doctoral student, Louisa Buffadecci, whose work you featured, who's here in this talk with us. A big congratulations to you, Louisa, and a big, warm hug from all of us at the VCA.
Absolutely, Louisa. I'm very glad you're here, and it is such a beautiful work. It really, I'm so glad to have it in the show.
Nina, thank you once again for everything that you've brought, and we look forward to hearing about the next lot of projects in Brisbane. And to all of the people who've attended Art Forum today, thank you for joining us. We don't take your company lightly, and we look forward to you joining us next week for another Nina. At 12:30, Nina Sanadze. So thank you. That's all for me. Goodbye, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much, David. It was my very great pleasure, and thank you everyone for joining.
Cheers.